Hello and welcome to MEELive. I'm Matilda Mallinson.
And I'm Tamara Hemani. Today is Tuesday, November 4th.
Today, ICE protests in America. Is Trump's anti-immigration crackdown also anti-democratic? Nearly 60,000 people in the USA are now detained by Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, or ICE, and the 20,000 jump since Trump's presidency marks the steepest rise on record. The vast majority of them have no criminal record.
No sé nada de mi mamá. Estoy enojado porque pues dejó a mi hermana chiquita de 6 años. Ayer que no la vio llegar a su casa. ¿Qué fue lo primero que preguntó? Preguntó por su mamá.
It's not only just what's happening, it's the rhetoric that you read out there from people, just seeing the hate in comments on social media. It really devastates you to think that that's how people feel about what's going on.
20 people have died in ICE custody this year. It's been the deadliest year in decades. Still, the government is spending tens of billions of dollars building more and more detention centres with names like Alligator Alcatraz and the Corn Hustler Clink.
But like it or not, Donald Trump campaigned for the presidency on mass deportations. He pledged to reverse serving immigration, and he won. So, like it or not, this is democracy, right?
More recently, Americans have been watching videos of ICE tackling a young mother, tear gas being used in a Chicago residential neighborhood, and the smashing of car windows. Have some of these raids gone too far?
No, I think they haven't gone far enough because we've been held back by the judges, by the liberal judges that were put in by Biden and by Obama.
You're okay with those tactics?
Yeah, because you have to get the people out. You know, you have to look at the people. Many of them are murderers.
Is this democracy?
The steep rise in ICE powers have seen a steep drop in due process. Agents are masked and driving unlicensed vans. New detention centres are being designed to minimise legal and family access. ICE spending on armour, guns, chemical weapons and explosives has skyrocketed.
And ICE isn't just clashing with the people it's targeting, but with American citizens protesting this targeting. ICE says attacks on officers have climbed steeply, blaming demonstrators blocking their raids and protesting outside their facilities.
These clashes have been used as a basis for the government's crackdown on citizens using military force. The National Guard rode into LA on horseback. From Chicago to Washington to Oregon and beyond, anti-ICE demonstrations have raged on for months. They are largely peaceful and patriotic, but federal agents have responded to them with tear gas, pepper balls, and felony charges.
By now, a thin but growing majority of Americans say ICE's actions have gone too far, but they are split. 85% of Democrats disapprove, 92% of Republicans approve. Polling was done by the New York Times and CBS in October.
So, are ICE raids an authoritarian assault on Americans' freedoms, or a democratic expression of those very freedoms? Is US President Donald Trump enacting democracy or collapsing it in real time?
Joining us now to help answer this question is US immigration attorney Eric Lee. Eric, welcome to Middle East Eye. In the months since Trump has come in, we've seen his anti-immigration campaign spiral from targeting illegal migrants, so-called illegal migrants, to arbitrary abductions and military deployment against citizens. What's really going on here?
What we're seeing happen in America is something that has never happened in this country before. And that is that the President of the United States is engaged in an active, aggressive conspiracy to establish a dictatorship. The executive branch is flouting court decisions left and right. They are deploying the military to the streets of major cities in violation of posse comitatus. They are threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would bring the country to the brink of martial law. They are calling broad swaths of free speech engaged in by non-citizens and citizens alike domestic terrorism. Stephen Bannon, one of Trump's fascistic advisors, said that there's a plan for Trump's third term. This is an illegitimate White House, an illegitimate president that said that they want to terminate the Constitution. And that's what they tried to do on January 6th, 2021. So the American population and the world population have to understand the absolutely unprecedented character of this qualitative shift from whatever criticisms one could legitimately make of American democracy into a military-style police state dictatorship.
And how central is immigration and the outward campaign to control immigration? How central is that to this increase in state powers, this authoritarian attempt by Donald Trump to change the Constitution of America? How central is immigration to that strategy that you've described?
Well, the country's massive non-citizen population is drawing the brunt, at least in these initial stages, of the attack on democratic rights. But I think that there is absolutely no question about that, and the role that the Department of Homeland Security is playing in this process is illustrative of this. However, I think that it's also important not to see this as simply an immigration issue. Often in the corporate media, it's presented somewhat as just another political issue amongst others. In reality, what the administration is doing by scapegoating immigrants is just the tip of the spear of this broader anti-democratic conspiracy. Again, I mean, you look at the videos that you just played on this segment. This is a country which, at least in part, is under occupation of its own military. They are, again, preparing to use the military and have begun to do so for domestic law enforcement. They are claiming that immigration is an insurrection so that they can unlock extra constitutional powers, essentially, and suppress all opposition from below. But I mean, this goes much deeper than just an attack on immigrants, as absolutely critical as that issue is on its own.
Absolutely, but is it fair to say that it sort of started with immigration? I mean, it was the guise of cracking down on so-called illegal immigration, with which the government sent in these ICE agents who are masked, who are driving unmarked vans without license plates. You know, the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, they're protected from freedom of information. They've said, oh, we don't need to reveal the identities of these officers for their own protection and for security reasons. But there are mounting allegations of abuse by these ICE officers. It's been the deadliest year in ICE custody. There are reports of sexual abuse in ICE centers. And yet, how do you hold anonymous agents to account? I mean, legally, you're a lawyer. How do you limit what ICE can get away with when they are masked and anonymous and their powers are only growing?
Well, two quick points to that. Number one, our clients often express to us on the brief phone calls that they get with us that they're experiencing horrible abuse, beatings, physical beatings, degrading, racial attacks, violations of their religious freedoms, the taking away of their Qurans, their prayer mats, etc. How do we hold them accountable? At this point, good lawyers will give you the following answer. We're doing everything that we can to use what remains of the democratic legal process in this country, but the answer to the political crisis is not going to be resolved primarily in the courts. It's going to be resolved by mass action of hopefully millions of people in this country who are waking up to the fact that whatever lies they may have initially been sold about illegal immigrants and criminals, et cetera, when Gestapo agents come into their city and start dragging people away from their families and pointing guns in the faces of people, that's not something that is popular in this country, and we're beginning to see the response from the population.
We are certainly beginning to see the response from the population, but we're also seeing a counter-response from the government, who have used those uprisings or those clashes with ICE agents as a premise to send in the military. How far does this go?
Well, I mean, the White House wants to take this as far as it possibly can. Trump has made statements to the effect that he's waiting for people to die so that he can send in the military. There's another important element of this. The Democratic Party has essentially done nothing to oppose this attack on democratic rights. Keep in mind, 7 Democrats voted to confirm Kristi Noem, who's the Secretary of DHS. 6 of them didn't vote. And every single Democrat in the Senate voted to confirm Marco Rubio at the State Department, who's leading the attack on the free speech rights of non-citizens to criticize the genocide conducted by the Israeli government and U.S. support for that genocide. So this is a situation where and I would add also, Bernie Sanders was on a podcast 2 weeks ago with Tim Dillon. He said that Trump did a better job on immigration than Joe Biden. I mean, this is the party that is supposedly the opposition. And so I think to answer the question of how far this goes, if it's left to the political establishment, it goes all the way. But if the population stands up and fights back, then I don't think it goes very much farther than where it's gone already, which is already too far.
Let's talk more about free speech. ICE has used the premise of combating anti-Semitism, as you've mentioned, to target dissidents. We saw this with pro-Palestine student protesters Mahmoud Khalil and Rameza Oztag. What's stopping ICE on these grounds being turned against any groups that the administration labels a threat?
Well, that's exactly right. That's the danger. I'll point to a recent case. We represent a 38-year-old named Yakub Vihandre. He's a DACA recipient. He's lived in this country since 2001. He doesn't have a criminal record, but he's made social media posts opposing the U.S. treatment of prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, at Bagram Air Force Base, has attacked the lack of due process given to those who are accused of terrorism. And the government on October 7th ICE came to his apartment in a quiet Dallas suburb and pointed a gun at his face first thing in the morning, dragged him to a detention center, and now he's has been detained for a month solely because of his social media posts, which the government claims are terrorism. Now, as a strictly legal matter, voicing opposition to a genocide, calling for resistance to oppression in a general sense, there's absolutely nothing illegal about that. And if it was, that it would have been illegal for all of the founding fathers of this country to oppose the British military when they occupied Boston in 1768. This is just another illustration of the fact that the government is trying to take any speech which is critical, which it deems anti-American or, as you say, anti-Semitic, and suppress all opposition to this government right at the time when it's trying to advance its plot to establish a dictatorship.
And what about political opponents? Today is the New York mayoral election, and Mamdani, the forefront runner, is already being threatened by Republican lawmakers who don't like his views and that his citizenship should be investigated and revoked. Now, at the same time, Trump has threatened to withhold funding from New York if they should vote Mamdani in. Does this say anything about how the government could, or perhaps even intends to, based on these expressions, use immigration law against political opponents?
No, certainly. And the Department of Justice has issued memos in recent months indicating that it plans to investigate naturalized citizens. They're attacking birthright citizenship already and trying to convince the stacked Supreme Court to strip the citizenship rights of millions of future Americans. But again, I think that all of this begs the question, why isn't there any opposition to this from the political establishment? We have a Democratic Party which is insisting over and over again that it's ready to collaborate with Trump, that it's ready to cooperate on the government shutdown. You talk about the shutdown. Now you have a situation where there's tens of millions of families whose children are going to be starving as a result of the cuts to food stamps and SNAP benefits and other social programs. So the key to the situation is that the working people of this country are the social force that can fight to defend democracy. That's always been the case throughout history, at least in the 20th, 21st century. That's the way forward in the fight against the threat of dictatorship.
Eric Lee, thank you for joining MEELive.
Thanks for having me.
So, how did Trump's campaign to crack down on so-called illegal immigration spiral to such lengths? Trump's 2024 re-election campaign promised the largest deportation program in U.S. history. Supporters showed up to his rallies carrying mass deportation signs.
The Republican Party said undocumented migrants crossing America's southern border had reached unacceptable heights and accused former President Joe Biden of losing control of the border. Although border arrivals had been declining months before the election, this message resonated with voters.
To deliver on his promises, Trump appointed a man called Stephen Miller as his deputy chief of staff, a powerful, long-time anti-immigration activist and a long-term architect of Trump's immigration policies.
Okay.
Sure.
I just hate how our screens.
So how did Trump's campaign to crack down on so-called illegal immigration spiral to such lengths? Trump's 2024 re-election campaign promised the largest deportation program in U.S. history. Supporters showed up to his rallies carrying mass deportation signs.
The Republican Party candidate said undocumented migrants crossing America's southern border had reached unacceptable heights and accused former President Joe Biden of losing control of the border. Although border arrivals had been declining months before the election, this message resonated with voters.
To deliver on those promises, Trump appointed a man called Stephen Miller as his deputy chief of staff, a powerful anti-immigration activist and long-term architect of Trump's immigration policies. Under Miller's leadership, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, has faced serious pressure to meet the government's goal of 1 million deportations per year.
So rather than focusing on criminals for whom agents had arrest warrants, ICE began widening its scope. In May, Miller instructed agents to go to Home Depots and 7-Elevens to meet blanket arrest quotas. To do so, they would target not just people with warrants, but so-called collaterals, aka anyone who looked like they could be undocumented. Critics call this racial profiling.
Then, in July, Trump's budget bill allocated $170 billion to federal agencies for anti-immigration enforcement, detention centers, border walls, and further deportation efforts. This funding has enabled an expansion of operations. For example, street vendors, apartment complexes, and factories have been targeted in large-scale raids, most intensively in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. When locals have protested, Trump has deployed the National Guard in the name of an anti-crime crackdown.
ICE's powers grew and its ranks grew too. A large recruitment drive has seen the agency lower its required age to 18, loosen training and background requirements, incorporate Border Patrol agents into its ranks, and offer signing bonuses and student debt forgiveness.
Recruitment ads posted on Homeland Security's social media talk about defending the homeland and culture, destroying the flood, and it warns that the enemy is at the gates. This kind of black and white, dehumanizing language has caused fear, and lawyers warn that it could attract those with extremist views, such as white supremacist views, instead of disciplining them, but actually rewarding them with power and arms.
And this may only be the start. Miller has now reportedly pressured ICE officers to triple daily arrests from 1,000 to 3,000. To round up today's show, tomorrow let's return to the beginning of all of this and Trump's presidential campaign pledge to crack down on immigration, to introduce mass deportations. Is what we're seeing in America exactly what the president promised?
Certainly in the lead up to last year's elections, many Americans were, particularly Republicans though, were dissatisfied with Biden's border policy. Now, it should be noticed that attempts to pass a bill legalizing immigration have been repeatedly delayed and repeatedly voted down by Republicans. So it's been a problem of immigration reform. But nonetheless, there was a belief that Biden had not effectively maintained control of the border, that illegal border crossings were sky high and they had risen significantly under the Biden administration. And there was a demand, particularly on Republican voters, for a sense of control and order at the US southern border. So Trump comes in, he says, we're going to have mass deportations, we're going to have the largest deportation program in US history, we're going to crack down on this, we will be back in control of our border. And this message of law and order and discipline really appealed to US voters, so much so that you would go to Trump rallies and you would see signs saying mass deportations now, peace through strength, all of this kind of take back control rhetoric. So Trump promises this to voters, and you can actually see that among Republican voters, the immigration and the border are pulling maybe only under the economy as the most important issue defining the 2024 election. So there is a real mandate for this. There is a real popular demand for Trump to take extreme and immediate action on the situation at the border.
To control the border, yes, but if this is about order and the border, it's leading to scenes of chaos in the heart of America's cities.
I think there's definitely a growing difference between what Trump promised and campaigned on and what Americans are finding to be the reality. So a lot of Americans, including Trump voters, have said something as this deportation campaign has ramped up, have said something along the lines of, oh, I thought he'd go after criminals, or I thought he'd go after, gangs and so on, but I never thought he'd go after, me or relatives or family members. He said he was going after the worst of the worst, that these people coming through the borders were the worst of the worst. And now, I'm hearing stories about people who do not look to me anything like that. And we've seen this as well, with flights full of people who the Trump administration says are hardened criminals going to El Salvador and elsewhere, only to find out that in fact half of these people are not even charged with the criminal offenses. So there has certainly been a discord between what was promised and what people are finding. And I think, this could be another event where it sounds like something compelling in theory. Oh, we're going to clean up our border and we're going to stop criminals getting in. And because you forget, you had real figures like, for example, Laken Riley, a young woman who was murdered by an undocumented immigrant, who became real martyrs for this cause among the right, and really took on a higher public stature than maybe if it hadn't been a crime committed by an undocumented immigrant. So you had this kind of demand for that. But then when you see what that looks like, then people start to get uneasy.
This is something that you actually often see governments do when it comes to immigration control. Before working at Middle East Eye, I was reporting on immigration here in the UK and across Europe for several years. And you often see state authority increase in the name of controlling immigration. We see it also with national security, right? And indeed, some of the examples you've given, the mass deportation of people to an El Salvadorian prison. This was done by the president invoking powers designed for state emergency, designed historically for times of war. And so immigration becomes a banner under which massive expansion in state military power can occur. The question is, at what point does that power stop being used just for immigration control and start being used for population control? And arguably, or at least what we're hearing, from Eric Lee, the argument he's making is that that line has now been crossed. Whether or not you thought it was okay for those powers to be used against migrants at all, they are now being used against the citizen population more generally. I guess my question for you is, if the campaign unfolding on America's streets is different to the campaign that President Trump promised, do Americans know that? Are they turning against it?
I think a salient part of Trump's second term in particular has been the increasing use of the language of us versus them. There are people in America who may live here, but they are not real Americans. They are not true patriots. And I think you can tell with some of the way that ICE has been conducting its operations, for example, saying they'd go after collaterals or people they suspect of being undocumented immigrants, which some people say, okay, so anyone who looks Latino or who looks brown, who's not white, basically. With some of that language, it kind of opens the leeway or the net for them to basically widen their operations against people presumed who they can presume are non-white, which is what many people are fearing. I think when you add to that the fact that they've slashed refugee admissions to, I think, 7,500, but the majority of those places are going to white South Africans, I think this is part of an evolution in what the Trump administration sees as a rightful American and what is not a rightful American. And I think if you start to be flexible with due process, people who go up to their court hearings only to then be taken away by ICE, if you begin pushing the boundaries of law and order, and as it comes closer to people's home cities, as they're seeing these things, against street vendors, again in Home Depots, as they're seeing it more in their everyday lives, that is beginning to touch upon their pre-constructed reality more and kind of break through the partisan narratives that have emerged so solidly in recent years. So you mean
like people who were okay with this happening to them, they think it's now starting to happen to us?
Yeah, I think as these become more widespread and by some accusations more indiscriminate, when people look at, the heavy presence, militarized presence of ICE agents and Border Patrol agents in their own neighborhoods, they will begin to reevaluate, are these guys really here to protect me? When you see Border Patrol agents swinging out of helicopters into apartment complexes, you have to wonder, are they just going after criminals?
And is that being reflected in the polling? Are Americans starting to wonder that?
The polling is still very divided. You have it hovering kind of approval and disapproval around the low 50%. There are indications that the net approval rating, there was just a few days ago an Economist YouGov poll, which indicated that from February there's been about a 10% drop in net approval ratings for Trump's immigration policies. But again, are they looking at all Americans or are they looking at Trump's base? When you look at these Homeland Security ads, when you look at these weird, ASMR videos of deportation flights and of mass arrests, is that to the half of the country that has opposed Trump? Or is that towards the Republican base, 92% of whom support this campaign still? Has enough pain been inflicted or have they felt ICE as closely in their life? Well, no, because ICE has been majority going into blue states, remember, under blue leadership. Now, obviously, not everyone in a blue state votes blue, but I think it shows you that Americans have likely experienced the second Trump administration unevenly and unequally. And those who have borne the brunt of it are likely those in vulnerable political or ethnic communities that have tended to be more opposed to Trump anyway. And that's the major difference. And you wonder whether in Trump voting environments, whether that narrative has broken through yet, whether it just needs more time. Because we've seen from Trump's first administration that people supported all of this immigration crackdown when they saw parents being separated from their children at the border and kept in detention centers apart from each other, attitudes began to sour. Whether that is the case now in such a polarized environment, it's hard to say. There has been the growth of a strong conservative media apparatus in recent years, and the narrative on their side is, ICE agents are under threat, there's doxing, there's defamation, people are attacking them, people are threatening them, they're just trying to do their job, and you know what, instead of the courts focusing on us, they should focus on all these violent protesters, is the narrative. So whether that narrative will be broken, it seems increasingly so, but because you don't have the same deployment into blue cities and states, LA and New York are seen as very liberal places, it's hard to gauge whether that realization will happen soon, if ever.
A lot of food for thought there. But that today is all that we have time for. So make sure you join us for future episodes, and please do send in your comments and questions. You can do so on social media at Middle East Eye or email meelive@middleeasteye.net.
We will be here at 5 p.m. British Standard Time, which is noon in New York, and we'll see you then.